Starting off this list with Kenny Veach. Kenny Veach was an experienced hiker and explorer who went missing in 2014 while searching for a peculiar cave in the Nevada desert. Kenny shared in a YouTube comment that he had encountered a mysterious M-shaped cave near the Nellis Air Force Base around Area 51, which had apparently caused his body to vibrate. Encouraged by other commenters, he filmed his exploration of the cave and uploaded it to his YouTube channel, Snakebite McGee, titling it M Cave Hike. Unfortunately though, on his third attempt to reach the cave a few months later, he vanished without a trace. His cell phone was discovered near the entrance of an old mine shaft, yet his whereabouts are still unknown. It's possible he got lost or had an accident, but the cave's proximity to Area 51 and Kenny's claims of odd vibrations led to a lot of online rumors and theories. Some speculated he might have stumbled upon significant information related to extraterrestrials or government secrets, and that his pursuit was intentionally disrupted. Despite extensive searches though, there's still no solid evidence or leads as to where he is. Next we have Ben McDaniel. Ben McDaniel disappeared in August of 2010 while exploring Vortex Spring in Florida. He dove down to explore an underwater cave roughly 58 feet below the surface. He resurfaced. It was totally fine. He refilled his tanks in preparation for a second dive later in the evening. But this time, he never returned. His truck was left behind at a dive shop. Inside it were his wallet, a cell phone, and a map of the cave. There were also 2 oxygen tanks found near the entrance of the cave. And the 2 divers who discovered them found it odd that there was just air in the tanks rather than having a mix of gas, which is typically the case when deep diving. The cave is known for being tricky to navigate with tight spaces and poor visibility, and despite a thorough search by experienced divers, he was never found. Some think he might have run into problems, maybe he got stuck or had issues with his gear, but no one knows for sure. And some even suggest he purposely disappeared or maybe faked his own vanishing, which is quite the reach, but there's still no concrete answers till this day. Next on the list is Michael Leland Vincent. Vincent went missing in Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky on May 5th, 2011. At the time, he was on parole and he had just set fire to his house, which he shared with his mother and aunt. Some speculated that he had attempted to burn down his house in order to fake his own death so that he could escape the consequences of his charges. Some say he may have taken his own life, but no body has ever been discovered. He lived very close to Mammoth Cave though, which is huge. In fact, it's the largest known cave system in the world. So if he did go missing in that cave, it's likely he'll never be found. Next we have Peter Verhulsel. Peter was exploring the Sterkfontein caves in South Africa with some friends in 1984. He had veered off the line, strung through the cave, which was used to help them find their way back out. Scuba divers were sent in to try and locate him, but days, then weeks went by before his body was finally discovered, at which point it was too late. Peter was unable to find his way back to his friends, but had managed to find a small underground beach where he pulled himself out of the water. It was pitch black in there, and his oxygen tank was just about depleted, so he was completely trapped. In this multi-week long search, rescue teams would have been within 36 meters of him, but Peter didn't hear them, and the rescuers believed that he had drowned. When Peter was finally found 6 weeks after having gone missing, it was determined that he had died of starvation. Floyd Collins. Floyd Collins met his unfortunate fate in Crystal Cave in Kentucky, a cave which he had actually discovered and had been mapping out and exploring for 8 whole years. On January 30th, 1925, while exploring the cave, Collins became trapped in a narrow passage about 150 feet away from the entrance. He had been working on creating an entrance to a grotto he had discovered down there when his gas lamp started to dim. Now, he was in a rush to make his way back out of the cave, and he accidentally knocked over his lamp, igniting it completely, or opposite of igniting it, he put it out completely, and his foot landed on an unstable part of the wall. Rocks started to shift, and one of them fell from the ceiling, pinning his leg. A rescue effort was, of course, launched, but Floyd was deep in the cave, and the difficult conditions made a rescue kind of tough to execute. Despite the attempts of rescuers, Collins remained trapped for over 2 weeks. Tragically, On February 13th, Collins finally died of exposure, hunger, possibly hypothermia. This was most likely the day he died, but his body wasn't actually retrieved until the 16th.
We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Maricela Botello. On October 2nd, Maricela left her home in Seattle and headed to Dallas to visit her ex-boyfriend for the weekend. On October 4th, the last night of her trip, Maricela wanted to go out, but her ex wanted to stay home. So she got into a Lyft alone and went to the entertainment district by herself. She was scheduled to fly back the next day, but she never made her flight. She never returned to her ex's home that night. By accessing her email, they discovered that she was at a bar just after midnight. Security footage from that bar shows her leaving with an unknown man at 1:15 a.m. That's the last time anyone has seen her. Her cell phone was last used at around 4 a.m. on October 5th and hasn't been used since. In our 4th spot, we have Sally Jane Damaris Smith. On September 25th of this year, mother of 4 Sally Jane Damaris Smith disappeared without a trace. Originally from Great Falls, it was thought that she was on her way to the Malta area before being reported as missing. As a result, police released a missing and endangered person alert. A couple of weeks later, on October 11th, Sally was found. Unfortunately, she was dead. Police found her body inside of a car in a storage unit. She had apparently died from drug overdose. They found a number of drugs in her system. But also she had left her car running, so it seems like if she didn't die from the drugs, then the carbon monoxide would have got her. Now what's weird is that I don't believe that the storage unit was even hers, so I don't know how she managed to get inside of it in the first place. At this time, police have ruled her death as a suicide, but there's some theories circulating that foul play was involved. Coming in at number 3, we have Tristan Chaboyer. 24-year-old Tristan Chaboyer was last seen on the morning of September 4th. That day he had talked to his mom on the phone and she claims that nothing was out of the ordinary. That was until 3 days later when she had not heard from her son again. After going 3 days without being in contact with him, she reported him missing. Later, police found bloody clothes in a wooded area behind a hospital. DNA tests confirmed that it was Tristan's blood. Later, his phone was found in a different city. As of now, no other information on Tristan's disappearance is known, but the police have ruled it as suspicious. Moving on at number 2, we have Destiny Smothers. In early November, 26-year-old Destiny Smothers traveled from her home in Troy, New York to Queens, New York for a funeral. On November 3rd, she went out to celebrate her birthday with some friends. They went to a bowling alley. Later that night, she left with her boyfriend. But according to her boyfriend, on the way home they got in an argument and she got out of the car and walked away, leaving her personal belongings like her purse and ID behind. On November 5th, Destiny didn't arrive to get her clothes for the funeral, and that's when her family knew something was up and reported her missing. Again, as of now, police have yet to figure out what happened to Destiny, but her family said, and I quote, "She would have never walked away without her things, and in the middle of the night, it's not like her." So please better hurry up and get to the bottom of what really happened that night. And in our number 1 spot, we have James Allen White. On October 22nd, James Allen White and his husband Rusty Jenkins both got up early to go to the gym. They both left home at around 4:40 a.m. and went to their gyms. They both worked out at different places. When James wasn't home by 7 for his conference call, Rusty knew something was wrong and went out to look for him. Through surveillance footage, it was discovered that James left the gym at 5:38 a.m. and headed home. He stopped at 6 a.m. to get gas, and that was the last time he was ever seen. A week later, his car was found abandoned at the side of the road, but it was in the opposite direction from his house, so they don't know how it ended up there. Recently, police changed the search from want to locate to an endangered missing persons case, but since the investigation is still ongoing, they haven't shared as to why they have done this. We can only hope that James will be found and brought home safely.
Starting us off at number 10 is Timothy Pitson. Back in 2011, James Pitson dropped off his 6-year-old son Timothy to his kindergarten class, and that was the last time he saw the boy. His mother Amy checked him out of school, citing a non-existent family emergency, and James only learned he was missing once he went to pick him up at the end of the day. That day, Amy took Timothy to the Brookfield Zoo, and then they spent the night at a Cove resort. The next day, they drove to a different resort, and Amy called her family members to tell them her and Timothy were safe and fine, but she didn't call James, which is the weird part. During these calls, many people heard Timothy in the background saying he was hungry, and that was the last time it was confirmed that the two were together. That night, Amy was seen alone at a dollar store, then a food store, and then she checked into the Rockford Inn, and at some point that night, she committed suicide by slitting her wrists, her neck, and overdosing on antihistamines. A hotel maid found her body the next day along with a note in which she apologized for the mess she created and said Timothy was safe with people who would love and care for him, and ended it with "You'll never find him." The knife she used only had her blood on it, but a quote-unquote concerning amount of blood in her car belonged to Timothy. Despite that, James still holds out that Timothy is still alive and somewhere here. Well, not here, but somewhere. Coming in at number 9 is Diane. So way back in 1998, around Good Friday in Florida, a woman called Diane Orgett was reported missing by her mum. Her mum went on to say Diane suffered from addiction and mental illness and was drawn to and easily trusting of men, especially men with money. Now it's still up in the air whether she left on purpose because of a man or whether it was an abduction. A few days after her disappearance, she left a worrying message on her mum's answering phone. In the message, she screams "help, help" before you hear a sound of some sort of scuffle, and then someone else saying "hey, gimme that" before the message just ends. She tried calling back, but obviously there was no answer. So at this point, okay, it sounds like she's being held hostage by this man, or maybe this was a romantic situation just gone wrong. 2 days later, the tip of Diane's middle finger was found on the side of the road she had been seen walking down. A week later, her clothes were found folded in a bag and disposed of in the freezer of a random convenience store. Totally normal location to just do that. Another bag filled with her makeup was found in another store, and it was labeled Diane. Till this day, no one has been able to find her, but based on the things that they found, I feel like this man probably did murder her. I mean, he already cut off her middle finger, so it's not out of the blue to say he could have killed her. At number 8, we have D.B. Cooper, and on the 24th of November 1971, an unidentified man, later dubbed D.B. Cooper, bought a one-way plane ticket from Portland to Seattle. Everything was pretty normal. He ordered a bourbon and soda while he waited for the plane to take off. When it finally did, he handed a flight attendant a note saying he had a bomb in his briefcase and demanded $200,000 in cash, all in $20 bills and 4 parachutes. Could they have checked the suitcase? What if he was bluffing? He got the loot once the plane landed and once the other 36 passengers were off the plane, but then he ordered the pilot to take the plane to Mexico City. I love how there was just no security or police at Seattle airport that could have just come onto the plane to try and stop this. Like, is it that easy just to tell the pilot just go somewhere? Food for thought. But anyway, the plane took off and he told all the crew to wait in the cockpit with the pilot. Around 8 p.m, long before reaching Mexico City, the aft air stairs were opened and Cooper jumped out with the parachutes and the money and has eluded authorities since. Some have theorized he must have died when he jumped out because the conditions were risky, it was raining with strong winds, and he wasn't dressed appropriately for a safe landing. I love how he's straight up in a suit and just decides to go parachute. Like, where's the logic? Either that or his neck might have snapped when he opened his parachute, no one really knows. 9 years later, a little boy found bundles of his cash in the Columbia River, so perhaps his body did end up somewhere in the woods of South Seattle. Either way, it still remains the only unsolved hijacking in US history. Filling our number 7 slot is Joan Risch. In October of 1961, Joan's 4-year-old daughter went to her neighbor and told her Mummy is gone and the kitchen is covered with red paint. Obviously, it wasn't red paint she was talking about, it was blood. Blood was everywhere. The telephone had been ripped out of the wall and a bloody fingerprint was left that they were never able to identify. I feel like there was no build up, I just straight went into it there, I'm sorry about that. But anyway, the blood created a trail that led to the driveway, yet no weapon or body was found. That is a horrific scene, but it's also just very suspicious. It's almost perfect, like the one bloody fingerprint, the trail that leads nowhere. It's just a bit suspicious. And to make things worse, it was discovered that summer, Joan checked out and read 25 books all about unexplained disappearances. One of them was called Into Thin Air, and it was about a woman who went missing after leaving behind a towel and a bunch of blood smears. Sound familiar? Many think Joan staged her disappearance to get away from her boring suburban life, whereas others conclude it was simply a coincidence. She was never found, so what do you guys think? Coincidence or it was planned? Now at number 6 are the lighthouse keepers. In December 1900, a ship docked at Eilean Moor, an island near Scotland. The point was to drop off a lighthouse keeper and relieve one out of the 3 that was stationed there. But when they got there were no lighthouse keepers anywhere, and the lighthouse just wasn't right. The whole scene was off. There was an untouched dinner set up on the table, a chair was found overturned, the lamps were prepared for lighting but weren't lit, all the clocks had just magically stopped, and 2 of the 3 men's coats were gone. Now, based on all the clues and signs they found, they determined that the men had been gone for about a week, which was just bizarre because it was against the rules for all keepers to leave the lighthouse, and all the men were quite experienced and followed the rules by the book, so it really didn't make any sense. Investigators offer that maybe they went out to secure a crane and got blown off a cliff. Even if that did happen, how did all 3 conveniently just get blown off this cliff? But this did seem to match with their final logs, in which they recorded storms so severe they were praying and crying. But plot twist, no one else in the area remembered any bad weather in that time period whatsoever, and their bodies were never found. Maybe they just realized they hated their jobs and they were like, screw this, we're out of here, let's change our names and move to Bali. I mean, I doubt that's the explanation, but it could be.
We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Paul Jepson. Now, this next case happened in the same area as Paula went missing in, you know, the girl that I talked about before. Yeah. In fact, the area has been given the name the Bennington Triangle because it's the area in which a number of hikers and residents go missing without a trace. It's like the Bermuda Triangle. Not only that, but a number of UFO sightings have been reported in this area. So, is it all correlated? Maybe aliens are abducting people there. Anyways, Paul Jepson was another victim of the Bennington Triangle. In October of 1950, Paul Jepson was out on his farm with his family. That's when his mom told him to go back into the truck while she finishes up her farm duties. When she returned to the truck, her son was nowhere to be found. Now, police did bring in bloodhounds to track his scent. And guess what? They tracked his scent up until Glastonbury Mountains, which is eerily close to where Paula was last seen. Coincidence? I think not. That's hella suspicious, I'm just saying. In our 4th spot today we have Mary Badaraco. In 1984, Mary Badaraco disappeared from her home. Her car was left in her driveway, but the side mirror was smashed in. On top of that, her wedding ring and car keys were left on the kitchen counter. But Mary was nowhere to be found. Now, according to her husband, Amy took off with $100,000 in exchange for their home. The two have been planning to get divorced, but no evidence of her taking that amount of money was ever found. On top of that, her husband never reported her missing, just insisted that Mary had left everything behind and wanted to start a new life. But her daughters were like, hell no, that's not our mom at all. After diving deeper into the case, it was discovered that Mary's husband was incredibly toxic. The two would often get in fights and he would hit her. So the police classified the case as a homicide, but the murderer has never been caught, and they don't have enough evidence to pin it on the husband. Another thing that doesn't make sense, sometime after Mary disappeared, her car did too, and later the police received a tip that the husband buried the car somewhere. I just wish that we had answers, like where did Mary go? Is she safe and living a new life somewhere, or was she killed by her husband during a heated argument? In our 3rd spot today we have Jessica Gutierrez. On June 6, 1986, Jessica Gutierrez was taken from her bed in her home during the middle of the night and was never seen again. The next morning her mom entered her room and found the curtains were ripped off the window and the front door was open. So it's believed that the kidnapper or kidnappers entered the house through the window and left through the front door. The creepiest part? Her sister was in the room with her when it happened. She claimed that Jessica was taken by a man with the magic hat and the beard. That's all we know about this case. Jessica's family believes that she was abducted by a close friend or someone that she knew. It's just a very sad and mysterious case. In our 2nd spot today we have Rico Harris. Rico Harris was a well-known basketball player for the Harlem Globetrotters. Now, a lot happened over the years, and in 2014 he was fired and then decided to live in Seattle with his long-distance girlfriend that lived there. He was in LA visiting his mom, but his plan was to then drive from LA to Seattle. Sadly, he never would make it. His car was found abandoned at the side of the road in Sacramento. The car was out of gas and had a nearly dead battery. In his car was his backpack and a phone with a video of him from that night. Harris was nowhere to be found. Now, days after his disappearance, people did see that they saw a giant person walking along State Route 16, which could have been Harris since he was 6'9". So it could be that his car broke down during the drive and he left on foot to go try and find help. But we don't know for sure. And in our number 1 spot today we have Madison Scott. This case has always given me the creeps. It just doesn't sit well with me. On May 28, 2011, 20-year-old Madison Scott disappeared from the Hogs Back Lake campsite in British Columbia. There was a birthday party being held at the lake that night and people were going to camp out there, but they didn't follow through with the plan. Maddie, however, already set up her tent and was planning on staying the night there anyways. She was an experienced camper and loved camping. She had camped out in that area a number of times. However, she was last seen around 4 a.m. when the last group of people left. The next morning, people were cleaning up when they saw her tent beside her truck, but Maddie was nowhere to be found. Police had dragged the bottom of the lake and aerial searches were conducted, but nothing ever turned up. Police even did polygraph tests on the partygoers, but it led to no possible suspects. Police think that Maddie left the campsite in someone's vehicle, but besides that, no one really knows what happened.
Starting us off, the number 10 is the Goddard family. In September of 1999, Dr. Yves Goddard took his 2 kids Camille and Marius fishing in the ponds of Planquerie, France. I tried googling how to pronounce it, you guys, nothing was coming up, so I apologize. Now, he told the boat owner he wanted a boat for a cruise and would bring it back on the 5th, but before he left he bought a bunch of floor cloths and cleaning products. Boat rides can get messy, I guess. Now, during a boat inspection the next day, officers found one of the kids sleeping and all seemed well other than the fact that the doctor was acting weird. The next day, a waffle vendor remembered seeing the trio, but by day 4 the boat was found abandoned. A dinghy was found nearby and on board was Eve's checkbook and a jacket and nothing else. Authorities also found morphine and blood in the doctor's van after the family were nowhere to be found. By the 8th, the police searched the family's home where they found significant amounts of blood everywhere, and when it was tested it turned out to be his wife's, who no one had seen since the 31st of August. Over the years, other items floated ashore the coast of Brittany, like IDs, the bones of Eve, and the skull of one of his kids. It was clear he had most likely killed his wife and then killed his whole family, including himself, but why? Coming in at number 9 is the Martin family. Back in December of 1958, Kenneth Martin, his wife and 3 daughters went for a day trip to Columbia River Gorge and never returned. 3 days after their day trip, when Kenneth failed to show up to work and the kids failed to show up to school, the family was reported missing. The first step was searching their house, where they found everything was as normal as could be. Drying dishes, laundry, the usual. Police found the family's abandoned vehicle and nearby a handgun covered with dry blood. Nothing came of that, but the bodies of Susan and Virginia were found the next year. Their bodies had been floating downstream near the gorge, and autopsy results showed they had both drowned. Most people think Kenneth crashed the car into the river, whether on purpose or by accident, and that's how the whole family died. At number 8, we have the Beaumont siblings. I can't even imagine losing my siblings, they're my whole goddamn life. So way back in 1966, 9-year-old Jane, 7-year-old Anna, and 4-year-old Grant disappeared from Glenelg Beach in Australia. Their parents let them go to the beach often, as they always came home by their curfew anyway. They were a good bunch of kids. But even still, I would not trust my 9-year-old to babysit my other 2 children, let alone go to a public beach alone. Anywho, when the children left at 10 a.m. and didn't return for their 2 p.m. curfew, the Beaumonts got worried. By 7:30 that night, their mother had called the police and was completely inconsolable. Witnesses at the beach said they saw the kids with a tall blonde guy with a thin face, which kinda sounds a bit like Count Olaf. Is anyone else getting that feeling? Just me? Now, a local vendor also told authorities the kids bought a meat pie, which was strange because the kids had never purchased one before and because their parents hadn't sent them out with any money. This led to more unanswered questions. Where did they get the money for the meat pie? Why did they buy it to begin with? And most importantly, where did the children go? There's still $1 million reward regarding their disappearance. Some think the man abducted them, while others fear they were washed out to sea or Grant got pulled out and his sisters attempted to save him, with all of them perishing in the process. Is it me, or does this whole case just sound a lot like the Baudelaire siblings from a series of unfortunate events? This man literally sounds like Count Olaf. It's the true story come to life. Filling at number 7 slot is the MV Joyita, I hope. Now, back in 1955, a fishing and charter boat was lost at sea, missing its intended destination by 5 weeks. There were around 25 passengers and crew aboard the vessel, and admittedly they all knew the ship was in extremely poor condition before they set off. The radio only had a range of 2 miles and it had a bunch of corroded pipes all over it. Regardless of all that, the ship was incredibly buoyant, so how could it have even sank? The air search mission couldn't find the boat anywhere, but a merchant ship managed to find it drifting 600 miles away from its origin with no crew or cargo. All they found was a doctor's bag and a ton of bloody bandages, with the radio turned to the universal distress signal. Other than those clues that they left behind, no one knows what happened and the crew was never seen again. Who was bleeding? Where did they try and go to get help? Why did they get on board to begin with? So many unanswered questions. Now at number 6 is the Gill family. Back in January of 2002, an Argentinian family of 6 were reported missing with no one knowing their whereabouts. Ruben and his wife Margarita worked as landlords and were a pretty basic family. On the 12th they went to a family friend's house and that was the last time anyone saw them. Police investigation revealed that Ruben had called a woman in Rosario multiple times the next day but were unable to trace her. No relative or friend knew anything but were sure they wouldn't have just disappeared voluntarily. They didn't have a car, they both had jobs, their kids were in school, they have no reason to leave. In 2006, the family's lawyer claimed the police were involved in the disappearance because they had been in a previous one. 2 years later, a raid was carried out at the home and they had found dugout wells all over the property and cleaned up blood on the floor. Ruben was a fun, sociable person, but in the days before the disappearance, he seemed quiet and worried. Different provinces were searched too, but with no new leads. What was also odd was how the landlord of their new home said they had left behind all their money and possessions, but when the police got there, nothing was found. He had also weirdly given them a 3-month vacation that month when he had never in their life before given them longer than 2 weeks. And apparently the two parties didn't like each other much either, so where'd the family go? My guess, the landlord got rid of them.
Number 5. Polly Melton. Polly Melton was not someone you would expect to be an avid hiker. Although out of shape and a heavy smoker, she still loved the mountains, hiked regularly, and made the base of Smoky Mountains in North Carolina her summertime home. She was well known in the mountain town community, even volunteering almost daily at senior homes in town. Now one day Polly went on a trail marked Easy in September of 1981. According to the 2 women she was hiking with, she sped up ahead them. It wasn't a far distance, but she went over a knoll out of sight. When the 2 women she had been walking with only moments prior got over the hill, Polly had completely vanished. They heard no strange noises indicating distress and saw no sign of a struggle. They continued to the campsite and still no Polly. Now Polly didn't have any belongings with her, not even a change of clothes or her purse. Now she was also on medications for high blood pressure and nausea, and she didn't have these with her either. There was no trace of her until a little over a year later when a check in her name was cashed in Alabama. Now police failed to say without a doubt that it was her signature, and there's a popular theory that she decided to run off that day. Did she secretly meet with someone in the woods? I guess we'll never know. Number 4. Nahanni Valley deaths. Over the decades, many unfortunate travelers and explorers have gone missing or they turned up dead and beheaded in this valley. The number of decapitated bodies found within Nahanni Valley have earned it the nickname Valley of the Headless Men. In 1917, Martin Jorgensen's body was discovered decapitated next to the remains of his cabin as it was burned to the ground. It's supposed that he struck gold in the vicinity as he wrote of it back home before ending up beheaded. Then in 1931, another body was found. This time it was of Phil Powers. His charred remains were discovered in the ashes of what was his cabin. The RCMP was quick to attribute his death to a faulty stovepipe, but their explanation was repeatedly debunked by various sources. Many others simply disappeared without a trace in the remote wilderness of the valley, and in 1928, one prospector named Angus Hall ventured ahead of his party and was never seen again. Another pair of men, Joe Milholland and Bill Eppier, disappeared in 1936. For many years they were searched for but never found. The only thing discovered was their cabin, burned down to the ground. So why do so many people go missing in this specific area, and why are their cabins being burnt down? I need answers. Number 3. Larry Jeffrey. Larry Jeffrey disappeared near the peak of 12,000 foot Mount Charleston in Humboldt-Toibi National Forest. The search began immediately after the boy wandered away from his brothers, and within days the National Guard and a team of bloodhounds had joined the search. In a TV interview, David Pauldys told reporter George Knapp that there were no predators afoot that day, and since the area they were in was pretty secluded, it's easy to rule out an abduction by car. This boy just walked into oblivion, David
said. Now, when Jeffrey disappeared, he was wearing light clothing, and authorities were doubtful that he could survive the cold temperatures at night. Searchers found and lost the trail a few times, and they discovered evidence that the boy had been eating insects and foraged berries along the way. Overall, around 1,000 people searched for 16 days, but they never found him. Number 2. Douglas Legg. Douglas Legg and some of his family were heading out for a hike at the Adirondack Forest Preserve, Sanatoni Preserve, when his uncle spotted poison ivy and told him to put on long pants to protect himself. Now, the family's cabin was a short, straight shot from where they were, but Douglas was never seen again. Now, he was very familiar with these woods as his family owned the cabin where they were staying and described him as a mini woodsman. Douglas's disappearance sparked one of the southern Adirondack's largest search and rescue missions, with more than 600 people searching the woods, but he left no trail. Rescuers used dogs in their search, and the dogs followed his scent over a 30-mile trail through difficult terrain. Now, there's no way he could have traveled alone for such a distance. Some researchers reported seeing bear-like tracks near the site, and while black bears do drag their prey to cover, dragging someone 30 miles over difficult terrain seems unusual. The family became desperate and began suspecting each other and even their friends of abducting Douglas, but the police were certain he had simply gotten lost. Now, he was never seen again, and he still has not been found. And coming in at number 1 is David Gonzalez. David Gonzalez went camping with his family in San Bernardino National Forest. At one point, he asked his mother if he could go get some cookies from the family car. 40 minutes passed, and his mother realized that David never returned and that the cookies he wanted to grab were still inside the car. Then he was never found alive again. His death is viewed as one of the strangest disappearances in national parks. A week later, his badly decomposed body was found only a mile away from where he went missing. This area was already combed days prior, so this means that he must have been dropped there by someone or something. An autopsy revealed no trauma and no overt injury. He was just dead without any reason or clue as to why. Now, this is already baffling, especially considering the power of forensics and the skill of investigators, but what makes the case of David so strange is not his disappearance alone, it's the way the local authorities and investigators seem to have handled the case. The officials claim that David was dragged off by a mountain lion, despite no injuries that would suggest that to be his fate. No one nearby heard David scream either, and David's parents have gone on record to say that they don't believe David got dragged off by a cougar. They believe that he was kidnapped and that he still may be alive somewhere and that body wasn't his. Now, this is sounding exactly like Stranger Things, and it's creepy. The family still thinks that he's out there, but law enforcement thinks this case is closed. Number 10. The Cowden family. 7.5 months after the Cowden family was reported missing in 1974, the police found their bodies. The Cowdens had gone camping in the Siskiyou Mountains in Applegate, Oregon over Labor Day weekend in 1974, but failed to show up for dinner at Richard Cohen's mother's house on September 1st. Media accounts from the time described their campsite as undisturbed, as if the family left abruptly. Investigators later postulated that they had been abducted. Then their bodies were found in April 1975, about 100 feet away from the campsite. Richard's body was found tied to a tree, while the other bodies of his wife, son, and daughter were found in a cave with rocks sealing the entrance. Dwayne Lee Little, a criminal serving 2 life sentences, allegedly confessed to a fellow inmate that he ended the lives of the Cowdens family while on parole, but there was no conviction and the case remains open. Number 9. Dennis Martin. Dennis Martin was on a camping trip near the Tennessee-North Carolina state line with his family in the summer of 1969. It was an annual Father's Day tradition. They headed to Smoky Mountain National Park to camp and hike. Dennis and his brothers had played a prank, and they were going to hide separately in a bush and jump out on different sides of the campsite to scare the dads. They did this prank, but then they realized that Dennis was missing. Family, park rangers, and other hikers spread out the search for Dennis almost immediately, but he was nowhere to be found. That evening there was heavy rainfall, which is bad news when you're trying to track someone. The search for Dennis became the largest in National Park Service history, and one of the people searching was Park Ranger Dwight McCarter, who had successfully tracked down hundreds of missing persons. Dwight was a seasoned tracker, and he was struck by the complete lack of any sort of tracks. Dennis seemed to have disappeared completely, leaving no trace at all. Number 8. Bessie and Glenn Hyde. In 1928, Bessie and Glenn Hyde were honeymooning in northern Arizona at the Grand Canyon when they vanished. They were traveling down the Colorado River in a boat in October and planned to boat through the Grand Canyon. Glenn had run tough rivers before, but Bessie was new at it. The couple ran across other boaters a few weeks before their disappearance who said they got a feeling that Bessie wanted to turn back, but Glenn was pushing her on. It was said if they completed the trip successfully, they could go on a paid lecture tour. So this trip was more than just fun, there was money at stake. Cut to several months later, the Hyde's boat was discovered that winter, seemingly undisturbed. It was upright and full of supplies, but the couple was gone. Now there are many theories about what happened to the Hydes. Did they disembark and try a too difficult side hike? Did they have an argument that turned violent, or were they abducted? There are conflicting reports about what happened to the Hydes, and there has been more than one Bessie Hyde sighting in the years that followed. Number 7. Paul Fugate. On January 13, 1980, Ranger Paul Fugate disappeared from what should have been a routine hike in Arizona's Chiricahua National Monument. Paul, who had last been seen heading out to do a trail check around 2 p.m., told a coworker that they could start closing duties without him if he wasn't back by 4:30 p.m. He was then seen starting down the trailhead, and that was the last any person spoke to him or saw him. His girlfriend alerted authorities, who undertook a search for him, and they assumed that he had been a victim of an accident and was injured or stranded in the backcountry. However, as the investigation continued, no trace was found, and suspicions began to rise. One park volunteer came forward to say that he'd seen Paul in a truck with 2 strange men, leading some to wonder if he had been kidnapped. Or some proposed he may have simply ditched his old life. Whatever the truth, no trace of Paul has ever been found since that day in 1980. To make things more difficult, Chiricahua has 17 square miles of canyons, treacherous terrain, and wild lands. The search and rescue team found absolutely nothing related to the park ranger. Number 6. Catherine Van Elst. Devil's Den is a state park situated in Arkansas, but it's larger than the Ozark National Park that surrounds it. In the 1940s, a girl named Catherine Van Elst went missing while camping at the park with her family. She was barefoot and wearing only her swimsuit when she disappeared. Searches were conducted high and low for the missing girl, but it wasn't until 6 days later that she was found. Now the catch, she was still barefoot, still in her swimsuit, and totally unharmed. She'd also traveled over 30 miles and climbed 600 feet without getting a scratch on her, and she wasn't even scared. No one, including her, has ever been able to explain it. So what truly happened, it seems like we'll never know.
Next up is the Nam Talu Cave incident. In 2007, Helena Carroll and her fiance John Cullen were exploring Nam Talu Cave in Thailand along with 7 other tourists. Things took a turn for the worse though, when a flash flood broke out. This giant wave gushed into the cave and swept away everyone except for Helena and John, who just started climbing in order to escape this rising water. They reached a ledge and debated what they were going to do next. John ultimately decided he was going to attempt to swim to safety and send back help. He did not survive, and Carol was found and rescued hours later. She was the only survivor. Number 4, we have what I like to call a close call. This was a story posted to Reddit by a now deleted user, but the story goes that they were exploring a cave with their family. As they were making their way out, they discovered a narrow opening in the rock, about knee high. By lying on their stomachs and squeezing through the tight space, they entered a small crawl space within the rock. The ceiling of this space was adorned with beautiful quartz crystals. Moving in one by one, the group stared up at this beautiful sight before them. The space was so tight though that they could feel the ceiling against their backs and the floor against their stomachs with each breath. They continued deeper though until the path led to an area covered in sediment formations like stalagmites and stalactites. Everyone thought this was pretty cool, but they began to feel water trickling onto their backs. They realized that it was raining outside, and the crawl space had a downward slope that would quickly fill with rainwater. The only way to escape was the way back they'd come in, and what started as a small trickle of water pretty quickly grew into streams, and the water began to accumulate. They rushed to exit, crawling out one by one, but the water was flooding in faster than they could escape, and the user who was furthest from the exit was trying very hard not to panic. They had the worst time here, crawling on their stomach with sharp crystals hanging from the ceiling again, and they struggled to keep up. The water level rose rapidly, splashing against them as they crawled, and just in time though they managed to crawl out as the water had reached their lips at this point, and everyone managed to get out safely. Ugh, I feel uncomfortable just reading that. At number 3, we have the Catacombs video. Now, while the Paris Catacombs isn't technically a cave, it is cavernous and dark and incredibly easy to get lost in. This is one of the most infamous pieces of found footage on the internet, as we still don't know who this person was. If you somehow have not heard about this case before, it's a POV video of a person exploring the catacombs. The camera with the footage was found later on by a group of explorers. Most of the video is pretty mundane until you start to notice that the person behind the camera seems to be getting increasingly more distressed. He starts to pick up his pace, pointing the camera around in a frantic manner as if realizing he's lost and is starting to panic. Then he's in a full-on run. The video ends with the cameraman finally dropping the camera and just running deeper into the shadowy depths of the maze of catacombs as the camera continues to film before finally running out of battery. John Edward Jones. In 2009, John Edward Jones went missing in Nutty Putty Cave, Utah. John was exploring the cave with his brother when he got stuck upside down in an uncharted narrow passage which he had mistaken for a section called the Birth Canal Passageway. Despite efforts to free him, John remained trapped in the tight space. Rescuers worked tirelessly to try and retrieve him, but in the end they were unable to save his life. The challenging conditions of the cave made it extremely difficult. The passage was only about 10 inches wide in some places, and it was positioned at a steep angle. The rescue operation involved pulleys, ropes, and other equipment to try and free John. They even brought in specialized teams from around the country to help, but unfortunately, after nearly 28 hours of being trapped in this upside down compressed position, John suffered cardiac arrest. Because of the dangerous conditions and the risk to the rescuers, it was decided the best course of action was to just close off the entrance to the cave, sealing it with concrete to prevent further access. And finally, we have the rescue. I thought I'd finish off the video with an uplifting story for once. Let's leave things on a good note. Uploaded in 2016 to the YouTube channel Exploring with Josh, the group of friends were exploring Ape Cave in Mount St. Helens, Oregon, when they made a pretty shocking discovery. At the start of the trek, the cave is very spacious, but pretty soon the group were on their hands and knees as they had moved further and further into the cave. It was becoming increasingly more low and narrow, and one of the guys suggested they just turn back, saying, "I don't think this is worth it, man. I don't think we're meant to crawl this far." But they continued on, and it's lucky that they did, because they came across a young girl who had got lost in the cave somehow. She didn't have anything on her, no light, nothing, but she'd managed to crawl in that far. The boys were able to bring her back to safety, where she was reunited with her parents. Luckily, she hadn't been in there very long. If they hadn't decided to explore the cave that day, who knows if she ever would have been found.
Now, let's start off the countdown with finding Lee. On Friday, July 9th, 2004, 21-year-old Lee Matthews was abducted from the parking lot of her university. The day before, she was out celebrating her birthday with her friends. Little did she know that that would be the last birthday she would ever celebrate. Shortly after her kidnapping, her father received a phone call from an unknown man. He said he demanded ransom in return for the safety of their daughter. Should they not comply, they were going to kill Lee. The father ended up giving the kidnapper what he wanted, but days went by and they still didn't hear from their daughter. Sadly, the Matthews family didn't get the happy ending they hoped for. A couple days later, Lee's body was found in a field. Now, this case isn't so straightforward. They did catch Lee's killer and he pled guilty, but there's a lot they still don't know, which they go into depth on in the documentary. For starters, a lot of the information the killer said in his testimony didn't add up. He said he killed Lee in the field and then left her there and burned her clothes. Well, one, there wasn't enough blood found at the crime scene for that to be the spot where she died. And two, they analyzed the bugs around and in her, and it showed them that her body was new to the area, so she had been placed there after she was already dead. So now they wonder, where was she taken before the field? Did the killer act alone, or was there an accomplice? And lastly, why did he target Lee and kill her? The documentary aims to answer all this and more, so I highly recommend you all check it out. Remember, click the link in our description. In our 9th spot today, we have Barbara Follett. On December 7th, 1939, author Barbara Follett got in an argument with her husband and left the house. She disappeared without a trace and hasn't been seen or heard from since. The body has never been found. So according to her husband, she left with only $30 in her pocket. Nowadays, that would have been worth around $589. Now, her husband, Nickerson Rogers, waited 2 weeks before calling the police, which is suspicious on its own. Why did he wait so long? Although a number of people suspect Rogers, there was no evidence suggesting foul play. Also, the media wasn't alerted about her disappearance until 1966. That's because the missing persons report was filed under the name Rogers and not Barbara's last name, so no one knew that the famous writer went missing. Now, was this done on purpose by her husband so that people didn't know she was gone? I don't know, it's all very suspicious, and it's hard to believe she could leave with anyone having any sightings of her. Moving on, at number 8 we have Paula Jean Weldon. Paula Jean Weldon disappeared on December 1st, 1946. That day she told her roommate she was going out for a walk, but Paula never returned home that night. Now, during her walk, she was spotted by a number of other students. In fact, one of her friends picked her up at around 2:45 and drove her close to his house. And then around 4 p.m., another group of school friends saw her about to climb a trail. But around that time, it was getting darker out and colder, and she wasn't dressed appropriately. Authorities were alerted when Paula didn't show up to class the following day. To this day, we don't know what happened to her. Did she fall off the trail and hurt herself? Was she kidnapped on her way back to the dorm? No one knows. What is strange though is that a couple of years later a local man was caught bragging to his friends saying he knew where Paula's body was, but he could never lead the police to the gravesite. So we don't know what to think of that, and to this day no body or personal belongings have been found. Moving on, at number 7 we have Walter Collins. Now, when I first heard about this story, it creeped me the hell out, so just prepare yourself. In the 1920s, a young mother reported her son, Walter Collins, missing. 5 months later, police brought Walter back home. Except it wasn't her son. But the police were like, no ma'am, this is your son, just take the boy. In fact, they went as far as to call her a terrible mother for not recognizing her own son and then placed her in a mental hospital. The real Walter Collins has never been found. It's thought that maybe he was the victim of the serial killer Gordon Stewart Northcott, but we still don't know for sure. To this day, the case of Walter Collins still remains a huge mystery. Another big part of this mystery, why were the police so adamant that imposter Walter was her real son? Seriously. In our 6th spot today we have Patty Blow, Renee Bruhl, and Ann Miller. On July 2nd, 1966, 3 young women, Patty, Renee, and Ann, all hopped on a motorboat at a Lake Michigan beach. They were last seen in their bathing suits headed off on this boat. They never returned home. And of course, there's a number of theories as to what happened to them. The most famous one is that the girls were on their way to a floating abortion clinic, but during the procedure something went wrong and one of the girls sadly passed away. The clinic was then like, oh snap, we can't have 2 witnesses, so they just killed the other girls and dumped them into the water. I mean, that's extremely messed up, and obviously it's just a theory. We still don't know what truly happened to them.
Coming in at number 5 is the Mary Celeste. People have such official names for ships, I swear I would name mine something short and sweet like the Oyster or the Pearl. Anyway, on the morning of the 7th of November 1872, Captain Briggs, his wife and daughter, as well as a 7-member crew set out on a journey from New York to Italy. The journey was meant to take 1 month, but the ship never reached its destination. A British ship called the Del Gracia saw the Mary Celeste drifting in the Atlantic near Portugal, so the crew decided to investigate. 6 months worth of food was found as well as all the crew's belongings, but the lifeboat had been used and deployed. The floorboards were under 3 feet of water, but the state of the ship was fine. It wasn't flooded and it definitely wasn't beyond repair. The captain of the Del Gracia actually knew Captain Briggs and knew he was a very capable sailor, so the scene made no sense. Till this day, no one knows what happened to anyone on board. It's speculated that they abandoned the ship thinking the damage was worse than it was, but then didn't survive after that. And number 4 is Roanoke, aka the Lost Colony. Back in 1587, Josh White led a colony to Roanoke Island, which is present-day Dare County in North Carolina. Now, before Josh, 2 attempts were already made to try and found the first English settlement in North America, but both attempts failed due to various reasons. The main one being bad relations with the local Native Americans and the settlers. Either way, when Josh got there, supplies and resources were slim, and so he went back to England to get more supplies in 1588. 1998. He told the residents of the colony that if the colony was taken by force, to carve a cross in a nearby tree so he'd know that that's what happened. Like, I love how he'd think if the colony was being overtaken, the first thing anyone would think to do would be like, oh wait, amidst this pillaging, let me quickly carve a cross into this tree. Either way, he ended up coming back in 1590 to find the settlement meticulously abandoned. All the fortifications were dismantled with care, but he found no carved cross anywhere. Instead, he found the word Croatoan carved into a post, and that was the name of a native tribe that were allied with the English at the time. White assumed that meant the colonists moved to Croatoan Island, but investigations pointed to them being killed by the Powhatan tribe, yet there was no evidence of a massacre, so again, we have no idea where they went. Filling at number 3 slot is Carol A. Deering. In August of 1920, the schooner, which had 10 crewmen aboard, set sail from Norfolk, Virginia to Rio de Janeiro with their cargo of coal. The original captain of the ship got ill a few days before its departure, so he was replaced and off the ship went, and they reached their destination safely, and they all lived happily ever after. Not, that's never the case on Top 10. A lightship keeper said he saw the ship on its way home and was hailed by an unidentifiable crewman who claimed the ship had lost its anchors. The keeper tried to report it, but his radio wasn't working, so he couldn't, but what he found odd was that the crew seemed to be milling around suspiciously for no reason. The next day, another ship saw the Deering near Outer Banks, which was weird because that would have been a strange course for them to take if the ship was really on its way to Virginia. A day later, it was found aground and on the Diamond Shoals with its sails still set, but all the lifeboats missing. Due to bad weather, it took surf boats 5 days to reach the ship, and as expected, it was completely abandoned. All the crew's personal belongings were gone, papers, the anchors, even key navigational equipment, all gone. Despite an extensive search, no logs were found either. But the most viable explanation people have come up with is that a mutiny must have occurred due to the crew's apparent dissatisfaction with the new captain, who already had an uneasy relationship with the crew. Is that not dramatic? Now at number 2 are the Sodder children. This one is long and detailed, so keep up people, it's worth it. Fayetteville, Virginia, Christmas Eve 1945. Italian immigrants George and Jenny Sodder went to bed along with 9 of their 10 children. The last one was away in the army. Yes, it was a huge family, I know. Now that night a fire broke out in the house and 4 children escaped, but 5 disappeared without a trace. George tried to go back in to get the remaining 5 children who were all upstairs, but the downstairs floor and staircase were already engulfed in flames. So he tried something else. Now he usually kept a ladder propped against the house, so he thought he'd use that, but that was also suspiciously missing, and he then thought he would drive his truck next to the window, climb on top of it, and go up from there. But again, weirdly, neither truck would start despite them being perfectly fine the day before. They even called the fire department twice but got no response, and by the time the crew came, it was 8 AM and the house was just a pile of ash. After the investigation was over, there was no bodily remains found amongst the rubble, so they suggested to the family that the fire was so hot it fully cremated the kids, but George and Jenny had their doubts. They even went to a crematorium where they were told that bones remained even if they were burnt at 2000 degrees for 2 hours. The fire only lasted 45 minutes. Months before the fire, a stranger told George the 2 fuse boxes at the house were going to cause a fire. Around the same time, another man tried to make him buy family life insurance and got angry when George declined and said, "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke and your children are gonna be destroyed. You're going to be paid for the dirty remarks you've been making about Mussolini." Now the night of the fire, Jenny got a weird call from an unknown woman who seemed to be laughing at Jenny, and despite knowing the front door was unlocked, she went to bed anyway. In the middle of the night, she had a long bang on the roof and then a rolling noise. It was later found to be a napalm that had landed on the roof. The house's lines were found cut, they weren't just not working. Someone else said they saw the missing kids in a car across from the fire. Another said she saw 4 of the 5 kids along with 4 Italian adults at a hotel, but despite following lead after lead for decades, the parents never found anything. And finally, at number 1 are the Springfield 3. Back in June of 1992, 19-year-old Susie McCall, her friend Stacy, and Susie's mum Cheryl all went missing from the McCall family home. The girls had just graduated at the start of that month and were last seen around 2 AM the morning after their graduation. The 2 were planning to sleep at their friend's house, but it ended up being way too crowded crowded, so they just went back to Susie's. They did get there since all their stuff was there, but the next day the friends had plans to go to a water park with this couple, and after not showing up, the couple went to the house to find the front door unlocked with nobody inside. There was broken glass on the floor, the lamp had been shattered, and their dog was in distress. While they were there, the girl received several phone calls from a random man who kept making sexual jokes. Stacy's mum got to the house hours later and was searching for clues in a panic and checked their answering machine to find a very strange message, which she then deleted. Like, this is evidence being erased here. But the main suspect of the kidnappings was Robert Craig Cox, a convicted robber and kidnapper. He had apparently told the media the girls had been killed and their bodies would never be recovered, but killers also tend to lie for media attention, so we don't know.
Starting off this countdown, we have Kelly Brannon. On July 14th, Kelly Brannon and her boyfriend Eddie Emerson checked into the Sunshine Inn Hotel in Live Oak, Florida. The two had been traveling all day in separate vehicles when Eddie's truck broke down, so they decided to stay at a hotel until the truck was repaired. When the two first arrived at the hotel, they got into a bad fight over where their live chickens should sleep. Kelly said to bring them into the room with them, but Eddie said that they should just be fine outside. Eventually the two made up, but later that night the fight continued on and it got heated. This time Kelly stormed out of the hotel alone. That was the last time she was seen. Eddie went to bed, and just before 1 a.m. the next day he received a voicemail from Kelly saying she was getting into a car. Police are still trying to figure out whose car she got into. Eddie fears that she was picked up by someone with sinister intentions. Now, Kelly is known to go off by herself for a couple of days, but when she does, she always makes sure to stay in contact with her mother. This time she isn't doing so, which is very worrisome to the whole family. Moving on, at number 9 we have Bud Paul. On August 1st, Bud Paul was last seen at a liquor store in Manitoba alongside a man and woman. That was the last time anyone had seen him. On August 7th, he was reported missing, and the police were asking for help to identify the man and woman he was last seen with. On August 10th, they found his car. It had been burned. Then, almost a week later after his disappearance, Bud's body was found in a river. Just this month, the two individuals he was last seen with have now been identified, and the woman was arrested. Now, the RCMP are working to figure out what happened the day he disappeared and what the motive behind this crime was. Hopefully, they will have more answers soon. In our 8th spot, we have Chandalal Gandhi. Back in September, an 83-year-old man named Chandalal Gandhi went missing in Toronto, Ontario. He was last seen out for a walk around 5 p.m. When he didn't return home, he was reported missing. Police urged everyone to check surveillance footage of their homes to see if they could track down where Gandhi could be. A few days later, he was found at the Clairville Conservation Area. It was thought that he got lost on his walk and later died from the elements, which is incredibly sad. His body was found a couple of kilometers away from where he was last seen. We have Veta Belford. On October 17, 2020, Veta Belford was dropped off at her job at Home Depot in Sacramento, California. Her shift was from 2 to 11:30 p.m., but when her mom arrived at 11:30, Veta never came out of her job. Later, she found out that she had been laid off from her job that afternoon. She was last seen at 3:45 p.m. on video leaving Home Depot and crossing the parking lot. There are no current leads as to where she may be. What's strange is that she had her phone and phone charger with her, but her phone appears to be off. Family says this is much unlike her. They said, and I quote, "What we don't understand is why she didn't call someone for a ride. She just walked out of the parking lot and that was it. We don't know where she would go or who she would meet. It doesn't make sense." Sadly, that is often the case with missing persons cases. They just don't make sense. And at number 6, we have The Hike. On February 9th, Robin Brown went out for a hike at Rattlesnake Point in Milton, Ontario with his daughter Kiara. They arrived at the park between 2:30 to 3 p.m. and had planned to return home by 5:30. When this did not happen, the police were called and they were reported missing. I should add that Robin and his ex-wife had shared custody of Kiara, and Robin had even abducted her before and refused to return her home. So when they didn't return home, Kiara's mom knew something bad happened to them. Later, their bodies were found at the bottom of a cliff. Police think they both slipped and fell, but the mother believes it was her ex-husband's doing. The homicide unit is doing an investigation, but it's not yet considered a homicide. But they're not ruling that out as an option.
Coming in at number 5 is Asha Degree. Back in 2000, on the night before Valentine's Day, Asha's brother woke up in the middle of the night because he heard some sound coming from Asha's bed. He assumed she was just moving around and went back to sleep. So naive little brother. What Asha was actually doing was getting her backpack that she'd already filled with clothes because she was about to run away. Many drivers saw her on the highway at 4 AM. One even stopped to ask her if she was okay, to which she reacted by running into the woods. That's really ballsy for a 9-year-old to run into the woods at 4 AM. I wouldn't even do that now and I'm 21. That encounter was the last time she was seen, and search parties found a shed in the woods filled with candy wrappers and a hair bow belonging to Asha. What everyone initially deemed as just a runaway kid took a very dark turn the following year when her backpack was found buried in garbage bags 26 miles away from her house. And she sure as hell didn't walk there. So either she was going to meet someone that she had planned this with, or someone found her and did something very bad. Either way, it's been 19 years and there's been no real breaks in the case, but it remains open till this day and her family still believe she's alive somewhere. But I feel like with all these families, you have to believe they're alive somewhere, otherwise I feel like you would stop looking. I feel like the hope is there to believe they're always alive. At number 4 are the 3 girls. In the mid-70s in Fort Worth, Texas, 17-year-old Rachel Trickler went to the mall to do some Christmas shopping with her friend Lisa and Lisa's young neighbor Julie. They were seen in the shopping mall during the day, and despite intending to be home by 4 PM, the girls were never seen again. The gifts they bought were safely stowed away in Lisa's parked car, but that was about it. Now, why would 3 girls leave everything all of a sudden? It doesn't add up. How many times am I going to say it doesn't add up in this video? Do let me know, keep a tally. Anyway, the only break in the case was a letter Rachel sent to her husband. Yes, I know being married at 17 is a bit much, but this was the 70s and it was Texas, so take it with a grain of salt. The letter itself was also quite shady. She wrote, "I know I'm going to catch it, but we just had to get away. We're going to Houston. See you in about a week. The car is and see us up a lot. Love, Rachel." No idea what she's referring to when she says I'm going to catch it. Catch what, an illness? Very confused. On the letter as well, her husband noticed she misspelled her own name the first time she tried to write it, and many of the numbers on the postmark were backwards. He thought he was trying to tell her something in code, but felt useless in the situation because he just couldn't figure it out. Despite it having been 40 years since the disappearance, the family still release pigeons in their honor every year. Filling our number 3 slot is Maura Murray. Maura was a 21-year-old nursing student living in Massachusetts. She emailed her professors in Feb of 2004 telling them she'd be missing class due to a family death, which was a complete lie. She instead emailed her boyfriend, withdrew some money, packed a bag, bought alcohol, and hit the road. Because that's the first thing you want to do when you hit the road, evidently. That night it was snowing quite a bit and her car hit a snowbank 140 miles away from her house. A bus driver asked if she needed help and she said no, but he called the police anyway, and that was the last time anyone saw her alive. Police found wine and a map to Burlington, Vermont, but her wallet, phone, and keys were all gone. Her life wasn't troubled really, she had no reason to run away according to her dad. During the search parties, a dog followed her trail for a while, but there were no footsteps in the snow anywhere. Before she disappeared though, things were a bit weird in her life. She was visibly upset that week at work after getting a call from her sister about a fight she had had with her own boyfriend. 2 days before the disappearance, she crashed her dad's car and the damages cost her $10,000. A note was found in her dorm implying Maura and her boyfriend were also having troubles. I love how this started normal and just slowly going very downhill. The note actually wasn't a note at all, it was printed out emails between her and her boyfriend about him seeing another girl. He took leave from the army to look for her, and a while later he said he received a voicemail of just breathing and then crying or a whimper, which he was sure was her. Either way, the call was from a prepaid calling card, so it couldn't be tracked, and no one has heard from her since. Now at number 2 is the Polaroid picture. New Mexico, 1988. The September day started off pretty normal. 19-year-old Tara Calico went for a bike ride and then had a tennis date with her boyfriend later in the afternoon, but she never came home. Plot twist, even though everyone obviously knew that was coming. Her mother started frantically looking for her and found the tape she'd been listening to in a ditch by the highway. The situation got worse when police found bits of her Walkman and bike at a campground 20 miles from where she lived. After that, the search went nowhere, no more leads, no nothing until a year later. A random woman had just been shopping in a grocery store when she found a Polaroid picture in the parking lot. The picture was of a teenage girl and guy tied up on a mattress with tape on their mouths, and it seemed like they were in the back of a van. First of all, can we just pause for a second. First of all, if you're involved in doing something like this, why the hell would you take a disposable picture of it that you could easily lose? Where is your logic? Do you want to get caught? When her mother saw the picture, she was convinced it was Tara because of the scar on her leg, which was similar to Tara's. I love when birthmarks or scars help in these situations. It was like, yes, we did it! But either way, the boy in the photo wasn't her boyfriend, he was never identified, and it was also never confirmed if it was actually Tara in the picture. She's still classed as missing, and there's actually a really popular podcast about her disappearance. And finally, at number 1 are the Sodder children. This one is long, it's deep, it's detailed, so keep up people. Fayetteville, Virginia, Christmas Eve 1945, Italian immigrants George and Jenny Sodder went to bed along with 9 of their 10 children. The last one was away in the army, just FYI, nothing shady there. That night, a fire broke out in the house and 4 children escaped, but 5 disappeared without a trace. George tried to go back into the house to get the remaining 5 children who were all upstairs, but the downstairs floor and staircase were completely engulfed in flames, so he tried something else. He usually kept a ladder propped up against the house, so he thought he'd use that, but that was weirdly missing. He then thought he would drive his truck next to the window, climb atop it, and go from there. But again, weirdly enough, neither truck would start despite both of them being perfectly fine the day before. Despite calling the fire department twice, no one got any operator response, and by the time the crew actually came, it was 8 AM and the house was just a pile of ash. After the investigation was over, there was no bodily remains found amongst the rubble, so they suggested to the family that the fire was so hot it fully cremated the kids. But George and Jenny just had their doubts. They even went to a crematorium where they were told that bones remained even if they were burned at 2,000 degrees for 2 hours, and mind you, their fire only lasted 45 minutes. Months before the fire, a stranger told George the 2 fuse boxes at his house were going to cause a fire. Around the same time, another man tried to make him buy family life insurance and got angry when George declined and said, "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke and your children are going to be destroyed. You're going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini." And keep in mind, in this community there was a lot of Italians. The night of the fire, Jenny got a weird call from an unknown woman who seemed to be laughing at Jenny, and despite knowing the front door was unlocked, she went to bed anyway. In the middle of the night, she had a loud bang on the roof and then a rolling noise, and it was later found to be a napalm that had landed on the roof, so clearly this had to be planned. Who just throws a napalm? Nobody. The house lines were found cut, they weren't just not working. Someone else said they saw the missing kids in a car across from the fire. Another person said she saw 4 of the 5 kids along with 4 Italian adults at a hotel. Despite following lead after lead for decades, the parents never found anything.